Okay, let's jump right in. We're tackling a film today that, well, really split opinions, didn't it? Caused a lot of debate, left people reeling. Baron Aronofsky's Mother.
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely not a film you could just sit back and casually watch.
Mm.
The source material we've been digging into suggests it's one of modern cinema's most symbolically packed, multi-layered, and, yeah, deeply disturbing works.
For sure. The articles and notes you shared, they talk about this surface story that seems simple enough. A couple, they're home, some unexpected guests arrive, things get weird.
Right.
But that's clearly just the very tip of the iceberg. The sources really argue the main substance is buried deep down in allegory.
And that's exactly what we want to do in this deep dive. Use these sources as our guide, really, to try and unpack that dense symbolism.
Yeah, explore why it hits such a nerve, provokes such strong reactions both ways.
Exactly. And distill what the sources see as the core messages, maybe hidden beneath that chaotic surface.
The sources also point out how the film mixes all these different threads. You got the Bible, mythology, definitely environmental concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and crucially, a really intense look at gender dynamics. It's framed as this powerful critique, psychologically and socially, mostly through the eyes of one woman enduring this, well, nightmare.
And one of the first clues the source material points to about its allegorical intent is the lack of names.
Right, no character names.
They're not individuals. They're meant as universal symbols right from the start.
So Jennifer Lawrence's character, Mother, she's not just a mother. The interpretation in the sources is she represents nature itself, maybe, or womanhood, the earth, life, creation, that kind of thing.
And Javier Bardem's
Yeah.
character, him, the writer. The sources tend to view him as a creator figure, God maybe, but with these distinct narcissistic traits.
Hmm.
Needs that praise, put his work above everything.
And the guests, the ones who just keep showing up and causing chaos.
They're seen as humanity. Curious, yeah, but also careless, selfish, just boundless in their consumption and disregard.
Which leads to this really fascinating idea the sources develop about the house itself.
Yes. It's not just a location, is it?
No, it's like a living thing, a character almost, identified so closely with Mother's body.
And by extension, the sources argue it's a metaphor for the world, or maybe the domestic sphere traditionally associated with women.
That's where it gets really layered. The sources stress that every bit of that house, the floors, the walls, that weird bleeding spot, the heart she finds,
The pulsing heart.
it all carries symbolic meaning. It blurs the lines, doesn't it, between the building, nature, and Mother's own physical and emotional state. The house basically is her.
Absolutely. That identification is key.
Okay, so we've got these symbols, this living house. Now, a lot of people saw the environmental message or the religious parallels, and the sources definitely acknowledge those layers.
Sure, they're present.
But the analysis we've been looking at argues pretty strongly that the most powerful and maybe the most unsettling layer is the personal one, psychological, focusing squarely on gendered abuse.
Yes, this is really the core argument in much of the material. They hone in on Mother's experience, how her boundaries are just systematically ignored, violated in the very space she built.
She's made to feel invisible, gaslighted constantly.
Exactly. Her needs, her feelings, her desires, they're just bulldozed over.
And meanwhile,
Yep.
him, he's like basking in the adoration from these outsiders.
Tries on it.
Totally consumed by his own creativity and just emotionally checks out on her, right? Reduces her to his muse or just background support for his life.
And the sources, they are really direct about this interpretation. They call it a stark, unvarnished depiction of emotional abuse, of the kind of control narcissistic personalities can exert.
She can't even say no, can she?
No. She's expected to just host, accommodate, keep giving, while she's desperately trying to hold on to some part of herself, her home, which, as we said, is her body.
So this critique of gendered abuse, according to the sources, is really the film's sharpest edge, its most searing message.
Yeah, they argue it just lays bare this systematic exploitation of a woman's body, her work, her emotional core, all driven by this narcissistic figure who kind of weaponizes love and loyalty.
It's arguing it's much more than just a metaphor for, say, Mother Earth being exploited.
Right. It's presented, based on this analysis, as a raw, almost tragic look at what it can mean to be a woman, trying to stay a woman, just trying to exist in that kind of consuming dynamic.
And a huge part of that abusive dynamic is this theme of exploitation and silencing. It's not just that her space is invaded physically.
No, the sources really highlight her labor, constant, unacknowledged work.
Exactly. She's always building, fixing, arranging the house, patiently doing it all.
Yet, as the sources point out, None of it is really valued or even seen sometimes.
Mhm.
In his world, she's just inspiration.
An object that helps him create, not an equal partner whose own work matters.
Precisely. And that leads right into her voice being silenced. The sources see the film showing this repeatedly.
Yeah.
She tries to speak up, express concern, set a limit.
And she's dismissed, ignored, made to feel unreasonable.
Yeah. She ends up feeling like a stranger in her own home because everyone, the guests, him, eventually even the idea of the child, they all seem to violate her right to just be, her selfhood.
The sources paint this as just a profound, almost gut-wrenching portrayal of that emotional exploitation. And the gaslighting, it's not subtle.
No, it's the central experience the film forces you, the viewer, to endure alongside her.
And him's narcissism, as the sources break it down, is what fuels the silencing, isn't it?
Absolutely. His desperate need for applause, for validation from outside. His love feels conditional, right? Like she only matters if she's validating him.
Using affection to get what he needs, emotional labor, support.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it creates this environment where her expressing herself, her needs, her objections, it feels like a threat to him.
There's that detail the sources pick up on how he dismisses her reactions as her being overly sensitive.
That's a classic tactic.
Mhm.
And the sources argue it's not just a character tech, it's Aronofsky holding up a mirror to how women's experiences, their voices, have historically just been shut down or invalidated.
What makes the film so, well, visceral is how it just keeps escalating. It doesn't let up.
No, the transgressions pile up relentlessly.
Yeah.
And that systematic abuse builds towards this incredibly chaotic, frankly horrifying climax.
Those final scenes are really tough to watch. The physical violence against Mother and then her final act, destroying everything.
Yeah, self-annihilation.
Yeah.
And the sources offer a very specific way to read that moment when her child is taken, then she chooses to burn it all down, including herself.
They argue it's not just a literal end of the world thing.
No, it's framed more as a metaphor. Like she's been pushed so far, her boundaries so utterly decimated, that the only way to reclaim any kind of agency or maybe preserve something essential is through complete self-destruction.
It ties back to that idea the sources raise about the expectation for women to be endlessly self-sacrificing.
Exactly. The film, in this view, shows the brutal endpoint of that being completely consumed by those demands until there's nothing left but destruction. A terrifying thought.
And the chaos of those final sequences. The sources describe it almost like a psychological attack on the audience, too.
Yeah, it pulls in all this intense imagery. You get hints of religious texts, the frenzied crowds, the violence, fanaticism, childbirth, the sacrifice.
But it's all mapped onto this one woman's complete physical and emotional breakdown. It's shocking.
So her setting fire to everything isn't just random violence. The sources really see it as the inevitable outcome. The eruption that this kind of constant, systematic abuse logically leads to. It's the only power she has left.
Yeah.
And what really hammers the message home, according to the source material we looked at, is that cyclical structure, the way it ends.
Only to begin again.
Right.
It resets, and there's a new woman stepping into the exact same house, the same situation.
Yes. And this is where the sources deliver this really chilling argument, this kind of exploitation, this abuse. It isn't easily broken. Maybe not on an individual level, maybe not even collectively.
So that repeating cycle is interpreted as, what, a visual metaphor for how entrenched these patterns are.
Pretty much. Like representing the recurring nature of a patriarchal system, where women's roles, their work, their very selves, are constantly at risk of being consumed or exploited. The new woman gets the same house, the same man.
The same silence, the same expectation of sacrifice.
Right. So the conclusion drawn from the sources is really powerful.
Yeah.
The film isn't just telling one story, it's telling the story, a cycle that repeats. And the devastating message is, this isn't just happening to this woman.
It's happening in some sense to every woman. That's a heavy idea.
It is.
Of course, Aronofsky's filmmaking choices are vital here. The sources definitely spend time on how he makes us feel this, like the lack of a typical music score.
Yeah, that's huge. Limiting the sound mostly to just breathing, creaks, the house noises.
The sources argue that's not just for atmosphere, right? It tracks us.
It traps us, the audience, inside that suffocating space with her. Just like Mother is trapped in her body, her home, her situation, we feel the claustrophobia because there's no musical escape.
And the camera work constantly circling her, staying with her.
Almost entirely her perspective. The sources point out how this forces us to experience everything with her. The fear, the confusion, the growing isolation.
Why is that forced empathy so critical to the source's reading?
Because By locking us into her viewpoint, the sources argue Aronofsky makes us internalize the psychological assault. We can't
Okay.
look away. We feel the gaslighting, the terror, as her reality just unravels around her. It mirrors her experience directly.
Plus that whole fractured sense of time and space,
Mm.
it gets really disorienting.
Mm-hmm. And the sources see that contributing directly. It mirrors her psychological state as everything she thought was stable is just systematically broken down.
So it all comes back to this central idea the sources emphasize. The film's horror isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It builds insidiously.
Exactly. From the outside, like the sources point out, maybe she looks loved. Right. Hume says he loves her.
But the allegory suggests it's more like consumption. She's not love for herself. She's love for what she provides. She's consumed by the demands.
And she carries so much alone, building the home, the pregnancy, dealing with the guests, offering herself constantly.
But the tragedy, as the sources see it, is that she's never given the space or the voice to just exist, to just be herself.
Which is why, ultimately, according to the sources, Mother is more than just an eco-parable or a religious allegory. It's fundamentally the scream of womanhood.
To scream of the silenced woman.
A scream of the silenced, the one expected to endure everything, the one who is emotionally consumed until her very being is defined by others' needs. And that scream finally shatters that old, often romanticized story of the purely self-sacrificing woman.
So to recap, drawing from all this source material, we've seen how Mother uses this incredibly dense, challenging allegory.
Yeah, to depict not just, say, environmental disaster or biblical stories, but this really profound visceral critique of gendered abuse, emotional exploitation, and how women's voices get systematically shut down.
It's a film designed to make you uncomfortable, trapping you in its world. And that cyclical ending argues this isn't just one story, but a pattern, a deeply disturbing one.
Mm-hmm. The sources really conclude it's less an apocalypse story and more this artistic, maybe even spiritual expression of an abuse cycle. Systemic violence, systemic indifference, woven right into how we relate.
A scream that demands attention.
Yeah, a scream that demands to be thought about, reflected on, probably again and again.
So after digging into the source material this way, what does it make you, our listener, think about this really challenging film and that powerful, deeply unsettling message?